There was a time when he believed silence was the greatest gift life could offer. After 30 years of service as a police chief in a violent city, Marcus Hale had witnessed the worst of humanity. He had stood in burning houses, walked through crime scenes that would stay with him forever, and faced down criminals who believed no law applied to them. His retirement had not been a celebration but an escape to somewhere quiet, somewhere honest, somewhere far from concrete, sirens, and broken people. So he bought land. 47 acres of rolling pasture in a forgotten corner of the countryside. Farmland stitched together by barbed wire fences. A worn-down farmhouse that stood like a stubborn old soldier against wind and time. It wasn't perfect, but it was private. The nearest town was 10 miles away. The nearest neighbor, too. There were no gangs here, no midnight police radios, no screaming city streets. There was only peace, and Marcus believed he had finally outrun chaos. Life slowed, and he allowed himself to breathe again. He rebuilt the barn with his own hands. He planted apple trees. He restored the soil. He adopted 2 hound dogs from the local rescue. He learned to fix tractors. He learned to stack hay. He learned that sunrise over his fields was worth waking up early for. But more than anything, he learned that peace doesn't stay quiet forever. It began with a rooster. Not a troublesome rooster, not a violent rooster, just a rooster. A proud black and red bird named Samson. Marcus had never intended to own chickens. But one day, while driving through town, he saw a small cardboard sign on a farm stand, "Fresh eggs and chicks for sale." He stopped. He bought 8 hens and, unknowingly, 1 rooster. And life on the farm became a little less quiet, but in a good way. The crow of Samson wasn't an annoyance to Marcus, it was a signal of another day earned. Another sunrise survived. A rooster didn't sound like noise to him. It sounded like life. But someone else did not share that view. She arrived 2 months after Marcus settled into his new life. A woman from the city with too much money and too little patience. Her name, according to town gossip, was Karen Whitfield. She had bought the land next to his after selling her suburban home downstate. They said she had once sat on a homeowners association board, a place she left behind but never mentally escaped. She brought her ways with her. Her need to control. Her belief that rules only mattered when she wrote them. Her obsession with appearances. At first, she remained quiet. She built her new farmhouse, a sterile 2-story structure that stood in arrogant contrast to the weathered rusticity of Marcus's place. Her land became flatter, prouder, tweaked by landscapers until it no longer resembled nature. She installed cameras along her fence line. She hired a surveyor just to confirm her boundaries. She turned country land into a polished museum of suburban perfection. And from her porch, she watched Marcus like a hawk stalks the field. The first sign of conflict came in an envelope. A letter in his mailbox on a windy morning. No greeting. No introduction. Just a printed notice stating that loud animal noises were a disturbance to neighboring property owners and must be addressed immediately. Marcus ignored it. He assumed some bored prankster had mailed it. There was no homeowners association here. No zoning law restricting livestock. He had done his research. He had chosen his land carefully, no one could tell him what to do on it. So he burned the letter in his fire barrel and thought nothing more of it. The second letter came a week later, with a printed signature at the bottom. Karen Whitfield. Again, he tossed it. The tone was passive but laced with threat. Words like nuisance and complaint appeared too often. Still, he gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she struggled to adapt to rural life. Maybe she simply didn't understand these lands came with sounds, cattle moaning, coyotes yipping, tractors working late, roosters crowing. This was not the city. This was not the suburbs. This was the real world. The third letter came hand-delivered. Nailed to his fence post. This time, it was not passive but authoritative. It gave him 72 hours to remove the rooster or face legal consequences. It cited noise statutes. It hinted at lawsuits. It spoke of escalation in bold red font. It used underline and italics as if shouting silently. Marcus read it only once. Not because he believed it, but because he knew exactly what it was. He had read 1,000 threats dressed as complaints. He had dealt with people like her all his life. People who believed they were the exception to the rules. People who believed power gave them the right to bend others. He had watched people like her ruin neighborhoods and lives. He had seen what entitlement turned into when no one stopped it. And now, she had chosen the wrong land. The wrong man. Marcus didn't answer the letter. He didn't storm over to her property. He didn't write back. He didn't waste energy arguing. Instead, he pulled out a binder from his filing cabinet. Inside it were county codes, property rights statutes, livestock regulations, rural ordinances. He didn't move out here blind, he had prepared. He had come ready. And the moment he finished rereading page 47, he began to smile. Samson was legal. Protected by agricultural use law. Protected by livestock codes. Noise ordinances did not apply to farmland operations. He was completely within his rights. And she, despite her persistence, had no legal ground to stand on. But people like Karen don't stop at legal walls. They climb them. They ignore them. They break them. Marcus knew that. So he prepared, not for defense, but for war. He installed cameras across his property. He placed trail cams along the fence line. He documented every letter and saved every complaint. He logged dates, times, and weather conditions. He took photos of Samson and the coop. He purchased a sound meter and recorded crowing levels. He built an archive not because he feared losing, but because he knew how to win. He knew patience. He knew timing. He knew exactly how far someone would push before they revealed who they really were. And Karen was just beginning. The fourth letter didn't come by mail or by hand. It came with a sheriff's cruiser. The deputy stepped out of the car with hesitation in his eyes. He was young, new to duty. He introduced himself politely and said he had received a complaint, one of many, apparently, from the woman next door. She claimed the rooster was harassing her, preventing her from sleeping, affecting her mental well-being. The deputy didn't want to be there. He respected the land. He respected farmers. And he could see the rooster was nothing close to a violation. But still, he had to file a report. Procedure demanded it. Marcus cooperated calmly. He had nothing to hide. He showed his documents. Showed the agricultural law printouts. Provided proof of county livestock permissions. The deputy nodded slowly, realizing he had been dragged into a personal vendetta. He apologized for the trouble. He asked Marcus to keep the peace if possible, but Marcus knew peace was already gone. It had been taken long before the deputy arrived. And it would not return quietly. That night, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and the last light faded from the fields, Marcus stood on his porch and listened to the quiet. The world around him slept in stillness except for Samson, perched proudly on his roost, head high, owning the night with fearless calm. Peace had ended. War had begun. And Marcus Hale, retired police chief, master of patient retaliation, was ready for whatever came next. Because if she wanted to take his rooster, she was about to hear him crow. The sheriff's visit did not slow Karen Whitfield, it energized her. To people like her, authority was not something to be respected but something to be used, manipulated, bent into a tool. When she learned that the deputy had come and gone without shutting down Marcus's rooster, she didn't take it as a defeat, she took it as a challenge. She had tested the limits, and now she knew just how much harder she needed to push. The next morning, the war became visible. It started with signs. Large neon yellow signs hammered along the road that cut between their properties. Signs that read phrases like "Stop animal noise," "Respect your neighbors," and "This is a quiet community." The words "quiet community" were underlined in red, as though the land had suddenly transformed into a suburban cul-de-sac instead of rural farmland. The irony was lost on her. But signs weren't enough. Soon the online campaign began. A new Facebook group appeared, Pleasant Ridge Rural Improvement Association. Despite the name, Pleasant Ridge wasn't an association. It wasn't even a neighborhood, just a loose patch of private ranch land owned by people who preferred distance over community meetings. But Karen had created a campaign disguised as community activism, targeting Marcus as her villain. She wrote long posts calling him selfish. She claimed his rooster crowed before dawn and terrorized her. She accused him of urbanizing the countryside with disruptive animal behavior. Her words painted him as a bully, an intruder, an outsider. And she urged others to join her in filing formal complaints until he was forced to comply. But rural people don't bend easily to outsiders, especially ones who show up and try to change the land to suit themselves. Most ignored her. Some mocked her. And a few even warned her to leave the man alone, he wasn't breaking any laws. But she kept going, feeding her obsession until complaint after complaint reached county offices, sheriff channels, community groups, and even local radio. Marcus tracked everything with cold precision. He didn't respond to a single post. He didn't make a single comment. He didn't knock on her door or demand an explanation. He watched, he documented, and he waited. Years in law enforcement had taught him many truths, but one above all, people reveal themselves under pressure. And Karen Whitfield, under the pressure of her own rage, would eventually step outside the safety of paperwork and recorded complaints. She would go too far. She would break the law. Because obsession always leads there. And when she did, Marcus would be ready. For now, though, she stuck to harassment disguised as activism. Her next move came in the form of noise tests. One evening, Marcus noticed a man in khaki pants and a windbreaker pacing along the road with a decibel meter. Every time Samson crowed, the man logged a reading. He remained for nearly an hour. Marcus didn't approach him. He didn't ask questions. He just filmed him from his porch to build his case. The man eventually left, but a new letter arrived the next day. This time, it came from an attorney. The letter accused Marcus of violating public nuisance laws and interfering with the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring land. It demanded immediate removal of the rooster and all other noise-generating livestock. It threatened civil action within 10 days. It cited noise charts, legal codes, and precedents that didn't even apply to rural properties. But it was intimidating, designed to pressure him into surrender. Many people would have broken, folded, given up for fear of endless legal battles. But not Marcus. He printed the letter, added it to his archive, and smiled. Her desperation was beginning to taste like fear. Karen had expected him to yield by now. She had expected him to apologize, submit, maybe even move. But his silence infuriated her. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He didn't play her game. He simply refused to participate, and that enraged her even more than resistance would have. Ignored control freaks are dangerous. They escalate. And escalate she did. 2 days after the attorney letter, the first drone appeared, buzzing low over his barn, dipping near his chicken coop, and circling his roof like a vulture scouting a corpse. Marcus didn't react. He had already installed wireless motion cameras, which meant every moment of drone harassment was recorded with timestamps and angles. He knew state law: drones could not be flown below tree height over private property without consent. He didn't shoot it down, not yet. He let it log its footage, and he logged his. The drone came again the next day, and every day after, for a week. Always the same time. Always the same pattern. A surveillance routine masquerading as hobby flying. But Karen made her first mistake here. She underestimated how much Marcus documented. Her drone flights were now evidence of harassment. Evidence of stalking. Evidence of trespass. Yet still, he waited. He upgraded Samson's coop next. Instead of appeasing her by reducing noise, he designed a sound chamber and insulated nighttime enclosure for the rooster with automatic dawn doors. The design actually lowered the rooster's crowing impact, but that wasn't the reason he built it. The real reason was strategic: it gave him leverage. By demonstrating he was taking reasonable steps to minimize noise, he positioned himself as cooperative and responsible. Legally, this made her look worse. Harassment against a neighbor trying to cooperate became much harder to justify in court. Every smart retaliation begins with appearing reasonable. But her retaliation to his non-reaction grew darker. Late one night, the coop door was found damaged. Not by weather. Not by an animal. Someone had tampered with it. The screw heads were stripped. The hinge pin was bent intentionally. Marcus studied it in silence. He knew exactly what it meant: she was done with legal threats. She had crossed into sabotage. But sabotage without proof meant nothing in court. He needed more. Something undeniable. Something unquestionable. Something to bury her with. So he set a trap. He reinforced the coop with tamper switches, silent sensors that triggered recording whenever touched. He placed trail cams hidden under brush and behind old fence posts. He left the door visibly scratched, inviting another attempt. He let the bait hang in plain sight. And then he waited in the dark. The night was still. No breeze. No moon. Just the hum of earth and the distant call of coyotes beyond the hills. His hounds slept at his feet. The barn light glowed dimly to feign normalcy. But every inch of his land was wired for vigilance. He didn't sleep. He didn't blink. He just waited. It took 3 nights. Near 2:14 a.m., motion lights blinked quietly on the east side of the barn. A shadow moved along the fence. Slow. Careful. Paranoid. Then the figure emerged, hooded, crouched, clutching wire cutters. Exactly as predicted. They reached the coop door right where he wanted them. The tamper switch clicked. The sensor activated. Every hidden camera on that side of the property lit up with silent recording. Their face was visible under the hood. The wire cutters gleamed. Their intent was documented fully. And just like that, Karen Whitfield had finally stepped into his jurisdiction. This was no longer petty harassment. No longer noise complaints. This had become criminal trespass. Property damage. Attempted harm to livestock. All felonies under rural agricultural law. He finally had her, not just in paperwork, but in action. And now, he would make sure she never forgot who she picked a fight with. Morning came slow and heavy across the quiet countryside. The sun crept over the horizon, spreading light across rolling pastures glazed in dew. Birds whispered awake. The old boards of the farmhouse creaked as they warmed. But inside Marcus Hale's home, there was no calm, only motion. Purposeful, quiet motion. He had been awake all night. The footage had finished uploading to his archive, saved in 3 separate hard drives and sent to a cloud backup, just in case one mysteriously disappeared. Every angle captured. Every second preserved. The intruder's face perfectly clear. The bolt cutters visible in hand. The tampering undeniable. They hadn't bothered to wear gloves. They had left fingerprints on the latch of the chicken coop. Sloppy. Emotional. Predictable. People like Karen always believed control gave them intelligence. But desperation eroded everything, even caution. No, wait, not people like Karen. Karen herself. Because now, there was no question who had been at the coop last night. The footage caught her face plainly in frame. Karen. Next door. Obsessive. Entitled. Alone. Believing the world would bend for her. Believing that no one would fight back. She was wrong. The law was now his weapon. He did not march to her property. He did not threaten. He made no call to warn her. He simply followed the right steps. He logged a report with the sheriff's department. He submitted the footage. He included timestamps, still photos, and copies of her letters. He provided motive, harassment pattern, escalating behavior, prior threats. He built a complete case file, prepared like a prosecutor, every detail packaged clean and clear. He knew the deputy from the last visit wouldn't ignore it. The law here wasn't blind. Tampering with livestock equipment wasn't a petty matter. Rural laws were strict. Chickens were property. Roosters had value. And a tampering act that could endanger livestock? That was felony territory. The deputy arrived mid-morning. This time he didn't look uncomfortable. He looked resolved. He reviewed the footage in Marcus's dining room. He didn't interrupt. His jaw hardened as the clip played. The report had already gone through the sheriff's office. Authorization for an arrest warrant was underway. Evidence didn't get cleaner than this. But Marcus didn't want an immediate arrest. No, that would be too easy for her. He wanted her to feel it. He wanted her to face the weight of her actions, not just in a patrol car, but in her reputation, her pride, her control. Anyone can survive punishment. But humiliation? Exposure? That's something different. That cuts into identity. Into ego. Into the very thing people like Karen wear like armor. Marcus calmly requested a restraining order in addition to filing criminal charges. The deputy nodded. It was logical, given the harassment history. But Marcus had a second motion ready, one even more devastating. A civil protection motion for agricultural property rights. If granted, it would legally bar Karen from interfering with his livestock in any capacity. No more noise complaints. No trespassing. No drone surveillance. No legal harassment regarding farm operations. And most importantly, any future attempt to interfere would immediately violate court order, meaning she could be jailed without trial pending a hearing. She wouldn't just lose the battle, she'd lose her leverage. The deputy didn't argue. He escorted Marcus to town to swear the affidavit. Paper after paper slid across oak desks. Signatures flowed. The courthouse clock ticked. And by noon, the warrant for Karen Whitfield's arrest had been signed. The deputy called for backup. Another patrol unit rolled slowly down the dirt road that cut between their properties. They didn't use sirens, no need. Rural law enforcement moved respectfully. But their presence was unmistakable. Karen was standing on her porch when the cruisers pulled in. She didn't expect them. Her morning robe and coffee mug suggested comfort, certainty, control. She looked confused. Then alarmed. Then angry. She descended the steps like a queen denied tribute, with the same superiority she carried in her letters. But superiority didn't matter now. Reality had come for her. The deputies spoke with disciplined calm. They read the warrant. They informed her of the charges. Her expression changed from arrogance to disbelief. Then denial. Then fury. She protested. She demanded. She insisted they had no right. She accused Marcus loudly, twisting the truth into wild accusations, claiming he faked the footage, set her up, used illegal cameras. None of it mattered. The deputies were unmoved. They placed handcuffs on her wrists. A shock of terror hit her expression then, because she finally realized this was real. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't a neighbor dispute. This was the law. And she had crossed it. She called it harassment. She called it abuse of power. She said she would sue. But she didn't understand she was trying to fight a man who had lived inside the law his entire life. She didn't know how prepared he was. She didn't know what it meant to challenge someone who never enters a fight without already knowing how to win. The deputies escorted her into the cruiser as neighbors gathered far off along the road. Phones recorded. Whispers spread. Country gossip traveled faster than wildfire. By sunset, every diner, every feed store, every tractor shop within 16 miles would be talking about how the new woman, the entitled one, had been arrested for breaking into a chicken coop. The irony would crush her. The footage would become a town joke. Her arrogance would become the story. Marcus didn't appear during the arrest. He watched from inside his house through a window, unseen. This wasn't a moment to celebrate. This was just a necessary step. Justice required patience and precision. And he was nowhere near done. Karen would post bail. She would return. She wouldn't absorb the lesson. People like her never did. They treated consequences like inconveniences. They blamed others. They believed themselves victims of unfairness. No, she wouldn't stop. That was fine. He expected that. Because he still had moves left. Better moves. Smarter moves. He would break her, but not with brute force. He would use her own obsession against her. He would let her destroy herself piece by piece. Until there was nothing left of her ability to interfere, not just with him, but with anyone. He would give her every legal chance to stop. But each time she pushed, he would tighten the law around her like a noose until she had only two options: leave or surrender. And he already knew which one she would choose. As the patrol cars drove away and silence returned to the country road, Samson crowed from his coop, full voice, proud and unafraid. The sound rolled across the field like a battle trumpet, defiant and untamable. Marcus listened. Then he smiled. Because the game had finally begun, Karen Whitfield returned home with a face that no longer carried the polished arrogance she had worn like armor. Something in her expression had changed after the arrest. The tight posture was gone. The proud stride replaced. The defiant smile absent. Her eyes carried the kind of cold intensity found in a person who had made a decision, one driven not by reason, but by pride consumed in humiliation. She had tasted disgrace for the first time, and instead of learning from it, she had declared war. The morning after she returned from jail, her driveway overflowed with vehicles, luxury sedans and high-end SUVs lined like soldiers at attention. Men in tailored suits filed in and out of her house. Legal mercenaries, summoned by ego. She had hired a law firm from the city, one known for aggressive litigation. But this wasn't defense, this was attack. Within 48 hours, Marcus received a thick envelope. A lawsuit filed against him personally and professionally. She had accused him of harassment, emotional distress, unlawful surveillance, invasion of privacy, and orchestrating her arrest with malicious intent. The filing requested damages totaling $250,000. She had also petitioned the court to seize his surveillance footage and bar him from filming his own property. It was a legal ambush, a strategy based not on winning, but on burying him in court. Marcus had expected this. Instead, she found herself up against something she didn't understand: unshakable resolve. Her response became desperate. She cut off all direct interaction, avoiding being seen outside. She hired workers to install blackout fencing along her property line, blocking her view of his land. Not for privacy, but for control. If she couldn't intimidate him directly, she would build walls. If she couldn't silence Samson legally, she would find another way. And she did. The first real attack arrived in the night. It began as a storm. A brutal one, wind tearing across the fields like a beast clawing through the valley. Rain hammered rooftops and lightning cracked the sky in jagged bursts of fury. Marcus secured his barn and livestock, checking every latch twice. Storms were dangerous for animals, but he had built everything with security in mind. His property endured the weather easily. But when dawn arrived and the rain faded, something was wrong. One of the pasture gates had been opened. Not by wind. By bolt cutters. His hounds were waiting nervously near the barn, pacing, ears pulled back, unsettled. Marcus followed their gaze and saw hoof prints in the mud. Not his animals, strays. Unexpected. Out of place. He tracked the prints across the field until they reached his eastern fence, where he found the source. A herd of goats. Not random goats, goats that belonged to a farm 3 miles away. They had not wandered here. They had been released here. The eastern pasture was where his apple tree saplings grew, new trees barely strong enough to stand against pests and animals. The goats had devoured the first row entirely. Bark stripped. Leaves gone. Roots exposed. The small orchard he had poured months of care into was gone, destroyed in one night. He didn't feel anger immediately. He felt calculation. He surveyed the damage in silence. The fence had been clipped. The cut was clean. Professional. Someone had used heavy bolt cutters, the same kind Karen had carried the night she tampered with the coop. He checked the ground around the cut fence line and found tire tracks, thin, like a small trailer or ATV. He noted their direction, toward Karen's land. It didn't prove anything, but it was enough to build a theory. Enough to begin tracking again. Enough to bait another trap. He called the goat owner, helped him collect the strays, and kept the details simple. Animals wander. Fences break in storms. Accidents happen. But not this. This had intent. And if Karen thought she could use animals as weapons, he would show her just how wrong she was. He didn't replace the fence right away. He built something else instead. A barrier. Not physical, but legal. He placed a new motion before the court, an emergency protective order for property interference. He added the apple orchard destruction to the harassment timeline. He included photos, timestamps, bolt cutter marks, tire impressions, and witness logs. He didn't accuse her by name, he didn't have to. He simply documented. The judge approved the motion. Karen was now legally bound by a restraining order that covered all forms of property interference, directly or indirectly. But that was just defense. Marcus was playing offense now. If she wanted to turn nights into battlegrounds, he would do the same. But he wouldn't break a single law. He entered his barn. Pulled down an old crate. Lifted the lid slowly. Inside, beneath cloth and dust, were the tools of a man who believed in order, strategy, and precision. Farm gear, yes, but not ordinary gear. A timing system. Custom wiring. And audio equipment. He wasn't planning to hurt her. He was planning to drown her. Not in noise, but in consequences. She wanted silence from his rooster. She wanted to strip him of his land rights. She wanted submission. She was about to get something else entirely. Night by night, inch by inch, Marcus Hale was about to remind her, you don't pick a fight with a man who has already survived worse. And if she thought Samson's crow was noise? She hadn't heard anything yet. Marcus did not need to resort to theatrics to make Karen's nights unbearable. He had always known that true defeat came not from loudness but from unrelenting pressure. Quiet, methodical, sanctioned pressure. The kind that eats at the edges of a person's life until they find no sanctuary, until every night becomes a mirror of the humiliation they've forged for others. His strategy intensified on two fronts, the courtroom and the community. In the courtroom, discovery became his instrument. Legal filings demanded production of evidence. Subpoenas required phones, emails, contractor invoices, drone footage, landscaping bills, and every petty complaint she had ever filed. The law forced transparency into the spaces she had tried to keep tidy and secret. Her counsel from the city pressed to shield certain items, but the judge, familiar with rural precedent and irritable at the misuse of legal process, ordered a wide disclosure. Karen's private crusade, once hidden behind legalese and suits, now spilled into the open. What came to light was worse for her than any single arrest. The records revealed a pattern: purchases of surveillance equipment timed to coincide with Marcus's coup activity, a string of heated messages to county clerks begging for restrictions that did not exist, and repeated coordination with the Pleasant Ridge Facebook group that had been little more than a puppet stage for her grievances. Worse still, message threads showed a campaign of targeted complaints against other locals, farmers, barn owners, even a man who raised goats 3 miles away. It portrayed a person not simply bothered by a rooster but obsessed with control. Marcus watched, file by file, as the legal net tightened. He had no desire for vengeance that looked like cruelty. What he wanted was consequence, a legal acknowledgement that her weapon had been her entitlement, and that weapon would now be turned into evidence of her escalating campaign of harassment. The discovery evidence painted a portrait of an aggressor, not a victim. The courtroom became a theater of exposure. Depositions unveiled contradictions in her statements. Her attorneys scrambled to defend a narrative that the record refused to support. The judge's orders limited her ability to continue frivolous complaints, and every denied motion further eroded her strategy. The county, once a passive recipient of her letters, now questioned why she had been permitted to dominate clerks' time. Local officials started to realize how much momentum she had been buying with a single relentless voice. But legal victories, though satisfying, moved at a pace that required patience. Marcus needed the town on his side as well. He had long calculated the social currents of rural life. People who moved to the country seeking order almost always came to value community. Respect in a small town was built on deeds, on shared labor, on quiet reliability. Marcus offered all of those freely. He volunteered for the volunteer fire department, helped repair a neighbor's fence, gave free lectures on safety at the feed store. His actions were ordinary, generous, and visible. They created goodwill like a slow but durable currency. He also organized gatherings that highlighted the truth about farm life without a hint of spectacle. A harvest morning at his fields, a small sunrise to supper event showcasing local produce, a neighborhood meeting about livestock and rural etiquette, each event deliberately scheduled around dawn, when Samson crowed and farmers were rising to begin their work. The gatherings were not protests, they were celebrations of a way of life. They made a rooster's crow sound like the heartbeat of a community. Neighbors spoke, privately and then publicly, about what it meant to live near working land. Stories of decades-long family farms were told. A tide of public testimony began to tilt in Marcus's favor. Karen's reaction to the social shift. The sound of a phone buzzing with subpoenas, of a late-night legal filing notice, of a neighbor's car pulling into the yard to deliver questions. Hours in which a person once slept in defiant comfort became hours of pacing, of second-guessing, of constructing improbable defenses against a tide of evidence. He did not orchestrate every late-night call or every waking moment she now endured. He had no need to manufacture fear when the law and community did it for him. But he did take small steps to ensure that her nights had no hiding places. He requested that the court permit extended discovery into her drone flights and video rentals. He demanded the preservation of her social media accounts and the release of metadata showing who followed her and when she posted. Each motion forced more data into the daylight, and each daylight meant another night of worry for her. That worry manifested physically. Marcus observed her once through a neighbor's fence line, late-night porch lights burning, coffee cups stacked like evidence, shattered sleep writ across a face that no longer reflected certainty. She paced her house with the kind of tension that comes from knowing your story is unraveling and not knowing what will be revealed next. The nights she had once kept others awake complaining were now the nights that kept her awake. All the while, Samson crowed in the mornings, unaffected. The rooster's sound, once an irritant to a newcomer, became the anthem of a community that had chosen not to be bullied. It became the soundtrack to depositions, to farmers' testimonies, to a judge's patient scribbles. The crow did not need to be amplified. It needed only to exist. Its existence was the fulcrum upon which justice pivoted. Marcus understood one final truth: when a person's life contracts to a single obsession, it suffocates. Karen's obsession had been controlling the soundscape of his life. He had countered that by expanding the soundscape to include the town, the law, and the unending documentation of truth. Her nights grew loud not because of artificial noise he created, but because every aspect of her life was now under scrutiny. And scrutiny is louder than any rooster crow. He sat in his kitchen on a thin night, paper strewn, files open, listening to the distant hum of the county road. His dog curled at his feet. The farm was calm in a way that frightened the unprepared, the calm that means work is being done. He felt no joy in another person's ruin. He felt the deep focus of a man finishing what needed finishing. There would be final moves to come. He understood that one conclusive action remained before true peace returned. As the moon slid behind the clouds and the night thickened, he rose and walked out to the coop. Samson beat his chest and called into the dark, full and proud. The sound rolled across Marcus's fields and, somewhere beyond the black outline of Karen's property, a light blinked. Another night had begun. Another round waited. Marcus closed the coop door gently and walked back to the house. In the quiet, he was already plotting the final step, one that would remove the last thread of hope Karen had for victory and deliver a closing strike that would echo longer than any early morning crow. The courtroom moved with the deliberate slowness of institutions that were built to measure truth, not to rush feelings. Motions were argued in the light of statute and precedent, depositions were cross-checked against timestamps and metadata, witnesses swore to the weather on specific mornings and to the exact sound of a rooster rising with the dawn. Marcus had never sought spectacle, he sought clarity. The judges' chambers, with their muted wood and patient clock, offered exactly that clarity in which the record mattered more than rhetoric. The record favored him. When the final hearing opened, Karen arrived hollowed out by the months of exposure. The bravado that had once been armor had eroded into something brittle. She leaned on legal counsel, on rehearsed statements and carefully sculpted defenses, but the documents told a story she could not deny. Her purchases of surveillance gear, her drone flight logs, the string of complaints filed across the county, each entry stacked against her like timber in a fire. The footage of her at the coop, the bolt cutters in hand, the tamper marks on the hinge, those images folded into the narrative with a cruel efficiency. The judge watched it all, expression unreadable, and when the gavel finally fell, it was not the triumphant sound of vengeance, it was the simple, irrevocable punctuation of consequence. The court's decision was comprehensive. Criminal charges for trespass and attempted property damage moved forward, and the judge issued a permanent injunction restraining her from any interference with Marcus's agricultural operation. The injunction extended beyond the immediate: no drones within a set distance, no secret surveillance, no hired agents to file meritless complaints, and financial penalties for any future attempts to disrupt. The civil countersuit awarded Marcus damages to cover attorney fees and ordered public retractions for the false statements she had published online. Most crushing for her, however, was the judicial order that required a formal notice be posted in a public place in town describing the violations and the court's findings. In small communities, law is not only enforcement, it is reputation. Reputation, more than finances, was the battlefield Karen had not anticipated losing. The posted notice became a quiet kind of shaming. People who had once hesitated to confront her now nodded in agreement when she tried to speak. Local businesses, previously eager for her weekends and donations, gave curt distance. Her social circle thinned. Her online group collapsed under a wave of dissent. Even her suit from the city urged reconciliation and restraint, suggesting settlement negotiations to limit further reputational harm. She refused at first, then acquiesced when further legal costs mounted and there was no path that did not include admitting fault. Marcus watched the legal machinery complete its work with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He had not wanted public humiliation for any neighbor, he had wanted an end to harassment. But truth had a way of being louder than any manufactured narrative. The town's response was not vengeance so much as a communal decision to protect the rhythms of life that had sustained them for generations. The rooster's crow was a small metronome in those rhythms, not a crime, but a signal of continuity. The court's ruling reaffirmed that continuity. After the hearings concluded, life on the farm settled into a steadier cadence. There were no dramatic fireworks, no cinematic final scenes of collapse. Instead, there were mornings where the sun rose over fields that needed tending, animals that needed care, and neighbors who exchanged nods over repaired fences. People resumed the small, ordinary tasks that stitch communities together: mending, trading, sharing a tractor or a recipe. Marcus found solace in the prosaic. He repaired the orchard, this time with stronger posts and goat-proof fencing, and planted new saplings with patient hands. He attended town meetings, not as a celebrity but as someone who had been tested and found steady. As for Karen, the end of the conflict was not a single climactic fall but a slow unspooling. The court-ordered notices remained posted for months. The legal fees drained accounts until she had little appetite left for litigation. Her property, once a monument to controlled perfection, changed hands within a year. The buyer was not a developer nor a distant suburbanite seeking dominion, it was a family from the county who wanted to return the land to working use. They cleared the blackout fencing and planted native grasses. They repaired the community's perception with simple hospitality, potlucks, barn dances, lending hands, and the place began to breathe again. Karen moved away quietly, selling to escape the scrutiny and the memory of being the person who had tried to silence a rooster and instead had been silenced by truth. Marcus did not celebrate her departure. He had never wanted humiliation for a neighbor to be the measure of peace. He tended Samson with an almost ceremonial gentleness, watching the rooster stride across the yard with arrogant purpose, crowing at dawn as he always had. There was no malice in those calls now, only affirmation. The sound made the fields feel whole. Children visiting from town laughed when the rooster strutted and elders nodded at once familiar sounds. The community had not only defended a rooster, it had defended a way of being. One evening, months after the final ruling, Marcus walked the perimeter of his property as twilight gathered. The fields glowed faintly in the setting light. Hounds padded around his boots. A tractor idled in the barn, ready for morning. The world felt intact. He thought about the long arc of his life, the years on concrete streets, the nights in which danger had been routine, the quiet years he had sought here. He thought about how justice in this place had not been loud so much as steady. It had been administered through law, through neighbors, through standards that had not been broken because a city transplant insisted they should be. He had given her a wake-up call, but it had not been the kind many expected. It was not a spectacle of revenge, it was an effective, lawful reclamation of peace. He had marshaled facts, community, and the slow machinery of justice until the truth no longer needed to shout. The rooster crowed on, the farm flourished, and the town settled into its rhythm. In the end, the most cinematic thing about the whole affair was not a noise that broke the night. It was how the quiet returned, gradually, insistently, as if someone had rewound a broken tape to the point before the static began. Peace, Marcus realized, is not merely the absence of sound. It is the presence of ordered life, animals fed, fences mended, neighbors trusted. He moved through his days with a new appreciation for that order. He felt no triumph in another's undoing, he felt satisfaction in the restoration. On a late morning when fog lay low across the orchard, Samson crowed as a salute to the sun. The sound cut through the mist and rolled over Marcus like a small benediction. It was a rooster's call, ancient and insolent and utterly unrepentant. It meant the day had begun, and for Marcus Hale, that was enough. The wake-up call had landed where it needed to, on those who would take from others the right to live quietly on their own land. The rest of the county, listening, rose and went about their work, and life, complex, flawed, and stubbornly beautiful, continued.